Welcome and thank you for showing up. Obviously, you didn't heed someone's warning because someone probably said, oh, that Rabenberg from South Dakota with Soil Works is kind of a different breed of cat. He isn't the normal run-of-the-mill speaker. He will speak of things that will probably be disagreeable with some of you, will probably be questionable with even more. But I am here to not make friends, but I am here to give information. There's a lot of bad information out there. And what I mean by bad information, I used to work in the animal pharmaceutical biological world. I was a vaccine and drug guy. And then they elevated me to a technical director, which I got to do autopsies to figure out why animals were dying, so the vets didn't have to do that grungy work. And I learned an awful lot. And I found out that the large companies in agriculture aren't really worried about us as their number one concern. Every CEO of a large company takes an oath that they will do everything and anything in their power to promote corporate profits. And many times that is not in our best interest. Many times a person will have started a company and bring in outside stockholders, and many times the dream of that founder is now overruled by corporate structure and stockholders' greed for profits. So a lot of times you may get information that will benefit the company more than you. If you've been associated with the Acres organization, they work very, very hard to bring in a lot of different types of speakers. In August, we had, the Acres had a Healthy Soil Summit at UC Davis in California. One of our growers was the featured farm tour, and he's the type of grower that any company would like and love to deal with. He will absolutely bend over backwards and half kill himself knowing that timing of everything is essential. In today's market, there's a lot of fantastic terms describing farming: organic, holistic, sustainable, regenerative, conventional. Organic, again. I like to talk about healthy. What is healthy? If you Google the word healthy, it says without disease or impairment. So what would healthy soil be? Minimal weeds, minimal detrimental insects, no nematodes, no detrimental cutworms, wireworms, armyworms, rootworms, no leafhoppers, no diseases. It's possible. A lot of speakers, a lot of companies don't want us to know this because Mother Earth was organic long before we got here. There weren't chemical companies, fertilizer plants, or genetic modification labs next to the Garden of Eden. It's designed to work. If you're familiar with the news, there's a company that has issued a teraton challenge, bold challenge, Indigo Ag. Bless their heart and salute them. They want to take care of excess carbon out of the atmosphere. How do you do that? Mother Nature's been doing it forever, and she did it best without our involvement. So when we look at healthy, what's healthy soil made of? You look at minerals, you notice water, you look at your organic matter or your carbon. How much air should be in soil? Does that ever show up on your soil test? Does that show up between calcium and phosphorus or between the two nitrogens? And how important is air? Anybody? Kinda? If we lock the doors, said we're going to be in here for 5 hours and nobody's going to get anything to eat. We're going to be in here for 5 hours, you're going to have to lift to me, that's going to be torture, but nobody gets anything to drink. We're going to be in here for 5 hours and there's going to be no air in here for the first 5 minutes. Nothing else matters. A friend of mine says air, heartbeat, and romance are all related. None of them important. None of them are important unless you're not getting one of them. Air is skipped over by most speakers. And air is skipped over by almost every company, because if your soil is breathing, you have a fighting chance to make it healthy. If there's no respiration, boy, it's going to be tough to get movement and work out of it. Healthy soil should have 25% air. Why is that? Because healthy soil should have 25% water. How do you know what 25% air and 25% water is? Well, you can look at your soil test and look at carbon and nitrogen and all the other things. It's hard to measure air. Yesterday we had a session where we talked about healthy soil, healthy plants. If you were unable to attend, everybody in that session got an orange sheet. This orange sheet, you can Google yourself to get the answers, and you're going to find out that there's a lot of companies that are not being 100% straight with you. They're telling you what they want you to know, and they're trying to sell you something that they have. Air is the most important thing for all good things. If you don't have air, how good can you be to your children, your family, or your spouse? You just won the lottery. Just bought your favorite car, and you stop breathing. I'm being redundant on this for a purpose. When you get your soil to breathe, inhale, exhale, it happens. Meteorologists know this because the meteorologists know that a high pressure front is heavy sinking air. And if your soil is flocculated or structured or isn't highly stressed being measured in pounds per square inch with a penetrometer, if you have less than 200 pounds per square inch of pressure in your soil, the microbes are happy. The microbes are doing their job, and when a high pressure front comes in, that air gets pushed deep into the soil as far as that 200 pounds per square inch has relieved the pressure of that soil. If you have soil that can't breathe, you will get plants that have many deficiencies. Copper, iron, zinc, boron, phosphorus, calcium. Every one of these minerals has to be hooked to oxygen to get to the plant. What do I mean by that? When you look at your soil test, you'll see all the different soil minerals, and soil minerals make up 45% of healthy soil. Healthy being without disease or impairment. To mobilize these minerals and get them from the soil to the plant, you have to have oxygen. Is there anywhere on this planet that you can find oxygen cheaper and more available than atmospheric air? Nobody's going to drag an O2 tank out there. It's not profitable. So if you want to get oxygen out of the atmosphere, you got to get the atmosphere into the soil. If someone tells you you don't need air in the soil, they need to go back to school. If someone says you don't need aerobic microbes in your soil, they may not be your best guide. If someone says you don't need available calcium and phosphorus in your soil, you will not be profitable. Calcium and phosphorus are the number 1 and number 2 minerals in each one of our bodies. In every species of animal, in every species of food plant growth, and also in every species of aerobic, beneficial soil microbes. Microbes, the beneficial, what I call the cooks of the kitchen, have to have available calcium and phosphorus in the environment for their physiological structure, just like for our skeletal structure. If they don't have that available calcium and phosphorus, nothing becomes efficient. Many companies get to sell you more stuff, and from what I understand, that's what they call the American way. Agriculture has gotten very expensive. It's gotten very intensive. And I can say that because I'm third generation on our family farm, and we've been organic, and I understand what farming's all about. It's a horrible investment. It's a horrible return on investment. The hours are absolutely unbelievable. The payback is very marginal at best, given different years, but it's in our blood and we do it. What is wrong with us? And we enjoy it and we come back every year for it. These people in these companies know that. So, Indigo Ag, with their bold stance, says we want to sequester 1 trillion tons of carbon dioxide from the atmosphere, thus teraton challenge. If you're going to sequester carbon from the atmosphere, and there's like 415 parts per million of CO2 within the atmosphere, this is good news for us. Because CO2, carbon dioxide, is made up of carbon and oxygen, and coincidentally, that makes up half the dry matter of every healthy plant. Carbon and oxygen makes up 90% of the dry matter weight of the plants that you guys are growing every day. You don't have to buy it because it's in the atmosphere, but it's got to get to the dirt. It's got to get into the soil. It has to go down and go through a microbe and be exhaled back out so it can volumetrically be pushed back up to get sucked into the stomatas or the cells on the bottom part of the leaf. A lot of people will say, and please don't take this personal, but they say no-till is the way to go. Maybe. The residue that the no-till groups talk about, they call that soil armor. They call that protecting the soil. They call that an insulation. They call it a blanket. I call it a loss of carbon. The plant that you grew last year and leave on top of the ground is going to be 30 to 40% carbon. Carbon, in the form that it's in that plant, when exposed, when exposed to infrared and ultraviolet rays of the sun, will oxidize, and it is lighter than atmospheric air. And over 60% of that carbon that used to be on the top of your soil leaves you. If you incorporate that carbon and a microbe, not just a microbe, but an aerobic, beneficial soil microbe that has had some available calcium and phosphorus for its physical structure, chews on that carbon and makes carbon dioxide, that CO2 is now 1.5 times heavier than air and has to be volumetrically pushed up with microbial exhaling so it can get to the leaf and thus complete the carbon cycle. The carbon and oxygen are the two main ingredients in the plant. Many people used to talk, and there was a young fellow up here that just asked the question, they says, you know, a lot of people used to talk about bricks. I don't hear many people talking about bricks anymore, measuring the sugar content with a refractometer. Here's why most people don't talk about bricks, is because most programs will not raise the bricks in your crop. Many people will have a refractometer and go, I've had this stupid thing for 15 years and I can't find anything out, any way to move the meter. It's real simple. Here are the top 5 things you need to take atmospheric carbon out of the air. It's free, by the way. Run it down into the soil, run it through a microbe and bring it back up, and now you'll be able to sell it. The number one thing needed to sequester more carbon, oh, and by the way, I don't know, maybe I'm speaking out of turn, but I think there may be a carbon credit deal going on with the Indigo Ag or the carbon credit. If you guys have heard of Tesla, Elon Musk, he received like $2 billion with the B, billion dollars from the other motor companies because they didn't align themselves with the governmental regulations of exhaust emissions. Yeah, anybody mind getting 12 or 13 billion dollars by taking care of some carbon out of your soil, selling it in the plant? Number 1, calcium. And it has to be available calcium. Calcium is one of the heaviest minerals in the soil, and if you never till your soil, calcium will move down through the profile, and then you'll see your soil test and say, man, I've got 3,000, 4,000, maybe 5,000 parts per million or pounds of calcium in my soil. My consultant says it's all tied up, unavailable. What's that mean? There's no air. If you do a soil test, it's a 0 to 6 inch probe. If you take each inch by itself, inch 1, virtually no calcium. Inch 2, virtually no calcium. Inch 3, not much. 4, we're getting a little bit. Inch 5 and inch 6, that's where your calcium's at. But you are now in a tight, stressful environment, over 200 or 300 pounds per square inch. The air can't get down there with the pressure, down pressure of a high pressure front, and that oxygen and the air has to get in contact with that calcium in order for the microbes to digest it and make it edible plant food that your plants will appreciate, enjoy, and you can financially benefit from. Calcium is the mother of all minerals in our term. We're from South Dakota, and I like to try to keep things as simple as possible. Calcium is number 1. Mama is always number 1. If anybody doesn't believe that, you'll get married and figure it out. Every good mother needs a father. Phosphorus. Available phosphorus. What does that mean? On your soil test. And these are the biggest challenges that most growers are facing because not a lot of companies are telling the truth about everything. Phosphorus has to be available, and this is what I mean by that. If you look at your soil test, you may see total P. You may see P1. You may see P2. Great. You look at the tissue test, look at your petiole test, look at the wet chemistry or the sap. Phosphorus is always, 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 and only represented in the plant as P2O5. What's the difference? A handful of oxygen. Where does the oxygen have to come from? The air. There's something else that's really cool in the air. As you're breathing, anybody smell nitrogen? We're used to it. It's 78% of every breath we take. Most people converting and transforming into organic, their biggest concern is nitrogen. 78% of the air is nitrogen. Why do we have to buy so stinking much? Oh, maybe the soil is too stressed to allow the atmospheric air to get in there. And you have to have air in the soil because there's over 319 strains of rhizobial microbes that will convert atmospheric nitrogen into plant-available nitrogen. They can make nitrate nitrogen for root, stem, and leaf growth. They can make ammoniate or ammoniacal for reproductive. If you have a nitrogen deficiency or are buying too much nitrogen or more than what you want, you have a carbon and oxygen deficiency in your soil, which is number 3 and 4 on your top 5 list. Calcium and phosphorus on an available basis is 1 and 2 because they're the parents of all the other minerals. If you're looking at your soil, nothing is going to work efficiently in your favor unless you have available calcium and phosphorus within the top 6 inches within each and every cubic inch of the top 6 to 12 to 24 to 36 inches of your soil. Going back to the Healthy Soil Summit in August with Acres last August, our farm tour was with Frank Oligary, and he has been a very good farmer. And when we first tested his soil, he had about an inch and a half of aerobic zone. He says, there's a lot that I don't understand, but seeing how long this probe is, we've got an awful long way to go. He can now go through his farm and touch his knuckles to the dirt. 5 years after we started with him, and not hit 200 pounds PSI. If you're saying, yeah, big deal, what's that mean? What that means is he has, I'm going to say this slow, he has $0 in synthetic nitrogen cost. $0. He doesn't have a nitrogen bill. What's he use for nitrogen? Take a breath. You just smelled the answer. When that air can go down almost 3 feet, it respirates an awful lot of microbes. No synthetic nitrogen bill. He does use liquid fish fertilizer that is high in fat and high in oil because that feeds the microbes. If your nitrogen bill is high, you're low in calcium, or you're low in carbon and oxygen, or you're quite possibly low in calcium and phosphorus. You have to have calcium and phosphorus in your profile if you want your plant to make photosynthesis. Photosynthesis being sunlight, water, and minerals hitting the green, chlorophyll and the life, and the plant making sugar. That is the energy, that is the immunity, and that's what raises the refractometer, and that's what raises your bricks. And if you've had a refractometer and you haven't been able to move it in 15 years, I'll guarantee you're short of 1 or more of the top 5 things that we're covering right now. Number 1 being calcium, the mother of all minerals. Number 2 being phosphorus, the father. Number 3 being carbon. 4 being oxygen. And 5, to round off the top 5, number 5 is beneficial, aerobic, soil microbes. A lot of companies may come to your farm and say, we have got a mycorrhizal fungi that is absolutely phenomenal. Your response should be great. What does mycorrhizal fungi need to live in? If they're honest with you, they will say, or they will ask you, what's your carbon to nitrogen ratio in your soil? That's important. Most growers have an 8 or 10 to 1 carbon to nitrogen ratio in their soil. If you're at an 8 or 10 to 1, you barely have enough carbon to keep microbes alive. You need to be at 15 or 16 to 1 carbon to nitrogen to get the microbes partying, to get them reproducing, to get the frat party going within the soil to make food for the plant. You need to be at 18 or 20 to 1 to keep mycorrhizal fungi happening throughout the whole season. Your mycorrhizal success is going to depend on how much carbon and oxygen are in your soil right now and how much sugar that plant will create and photosynthetically process to transfer down to the roots. If someone says you can foliar feed yourself to success, you don't have to worry about the soil, please question them and do your own research. You will not grow a healthy plant out of unhealthy soil. It's kind of like if you have kids that are young, you're looking for a babysitter, and there's a house right across the street that you know is a meth manufacturing house. Well, shoot, it's right across the street. They're there all the time. What could it hurt? They look like good people. They have a lot of visitors. Probably not your first choice for a babysitter for your kids. Well, if you have soil that can't breathe, it's not going to be a good environment for microbes. Now, a little bit more science that we see with the penetrometer in a lot of no-till or minimum till fields. And I've got nothing against no-till or minimum till unless it doesn't work. And what I mean by work, if you can have healthy soil without disease or impairment with no-till, I'm all for it. If you can grow healthy plants without disease or impairment, I'm all for it. Most cases, it isn't the most efficient way. That calcium needs to be brought back up. Many times if you do a pediatrician or a sap test, you'll see copper, iron, zinc, manganese, boron deficiencies. Those are all very heavy minerals, and they methodically move down through the profile. And when they get below the air zone, the oxygen zone, the respiration zone, the aerobic biological zone, they become unavailable. They become tied up. So if you have minerals in the soil, if you got copper, iron, zinc, manganese, boron in the soil, but it's not getting to the plant, you're just going to buy more trace minerals? Sure, why not? Why use what you've already got? Get some air in your soil. Get some microbes being happy, partying, reproducing, and biologically complexing those into plant food, and you will become more efficient. Here's what happens in a lot of soil. In order for a microbe to exhale CO2, in order for us to exhale CO2, we know we have to have one carbon, we have to have two oxygens, CO2, carbon dioxide. What happens if we take one molecule of oxygen away from carbon dioxide? We get carbon. Hey, who wants a dose of that? Carbon monoxide, just one molecule of oxygen short, and now death starts to happen. That's part of that sour smell, that dead smell. When you dig up that soil and take a whiff, it's like, ooh, that doesn't smell very healthy. Take one more molecule, the last molecule of oxygen away from soil. When you have carbon in an airless environment, things don't look good. So you go to the local co-op, you go to your local fertilizer guy and say, I got to have something for this crop. It just doesn't look very good. His first answer is, well, we need to give it a little shot of nitrogen. Nitrogen mixed with carbon in an airless environment has the opportunity to form cyanide. Yay! We test this quite frequently in many different types of soils. If you have cyanide, if you have carbon monoxide, if you fight disease, if you fight weeds, if the weeds are outgrowing your crop, there's 5 things that you need to focus on that hopefully you have written down on your sheet. If you don't have it written down, we will hand you one of these sheets at the back. We will fill it out. This will also be on our website. I am the disruptive speaker that a lot of groups will not hire because I tell more truth than what a lot of organizations want growers to know. As we're looking at soil, air is the most important thing to look at. If you have a deficiency in trace minerals, Take a look at your top 5 list. Because that deficiency in copper, iron, zinc, boron, or manganese, if you have it in the soil, if you look at your soil test and you say, oh shoot, how many times has that changed? The slide. I'm not paying attention here. Good stuff. As we look at this, dispersive soil, aggregated soil, flocculated soil, everything has to work together. Calcium and phosphorus are the parents. When we look at flocculated soil and aggregated soil and dispersive soil, what we're looking at is the structure. There's a lot of different numbers in your soil that are very important. But if you have tight, airless soil, if your soil is lumpy, clumpy, cloddy, crusted, greasy, slimy, sticky when it's wet, sticks to your boots, you get waffle boots, you have an excess of magnesium. Magnesium is the electrolyte mineral that wants to grab onto everything. In most parts of the world, if you have excess magnesium, no-till farming may not be the best choice for you. Magnesium is one of the electrolyte minerals and likes to grab onto stuff. Magnesium is like the greedy little child in the sandbox that grabs every toy. Can't play with it, but it wants to grab everyone and pull them into its corner. Magnesium in the soil loves nitrogen. In fact, every molecule or every percent of magnesium that you have in excess will tie up an equal amount of nitrogen. So think about your soils. Think about some of your fields. Think about your groves or your orchards. Where that soil is tighter, you'll see a quicker nitrogen deficiency. Why? Because the magnesium is in higher excess there, and it's electrically grabbing on to the nitrogen. If your carbon to nitrogen ratio is in the 8 or 10 or 12 to 1, and you say, golly, we need to get that to 15 or 16 to get the microbes happy, how are we going to do that? That sounds like it's going to be expensive. Many companies will say, well, it's sure a good, honest thought and a try, but you'll probably never achieve it. Baloney. By opening up your soil with available calcium, that calcium will come in. If you have some excess salt or sodium, it'll grab onto those. And if you have the proper kind of calcium, it will grab onto the magnesium and say, let go of the nitrogen. Every good mother has done that at some point in time. Let go of the toy, let go of the cake, let go of your sister's hair. In this case, calcium will say, let go of the nitrogen. That nitrogen shows on the carbon to nitrogen ratio test, but it's unavailable. It's tied up, but it makes the ratio not look good in your favor. So your carbon to nitrogen ratio is an 8 to 1. All of a sudden you get rid of a whole bunch of nitrogen that's tied up in the magnesium of your soil. It changes that ratio. You didn't raise the carbon, but you reduced the excess nitrogen. All of a sudden now, without a huge expense and input cost, the microbes are going, hey, thanks for the less stressful environment. Thanks for the 200 psi environment. Thanks for the available calcium and the phosphorus and the carbon and the oxygen, because we're going to have a party. If you listen very closely in the spring of the year or in the fall of the year, just between the seasons, and the wind is just right, you will hear these microbes partying in the soil. They're quite shy. If you don't hear it, you probably made a little bit too much noise getting out there. They will make life wonderful for you. What's my point with this? The beneficial aerobic soil microbes that you guys have to be successful and efficient and financially secure. They love the same thing that healthy food plants enjoy. And healthy food producing plants will provide the same nutrition that healthy livestock needs. And healthy livestock prospers with the same nutritional ratio that we need. It's almost like there was a plan when this was all put together. When you understand one form of good, healthy, beneficial life, you have a very good idea and understanding of what's going on with many other species. Weeds. I know none of you guys have weeds or gals have weeds, but I bet maybe your neighbors may have a weed or two. There's a weed book written by Jay McCaman, fantastic, brilliant agronomist. He used to work for AgriEnergies, and he put together a book. His newest book is called When Weeds, or at least this edition is When Weeds Talk. The first edition is Weeds and Why They Grow. He gives the environment that weeds enjoy. Now, many college professors, when asked, "What's a weed?" they will proudly stand up, take a big deep breath, and say, "It's a plant growing out of place." Being the weirdo that I am, I politely disagree. That weed is growing exactly where it's supposed to because it's a mechanic. It's a lower level plant that does not enjoy the 5 things that are most important for your food crop. That weed is trying to bust up hardpan. It's trying to pull calcium back up if it has a healthy taproot. And the bigger, the taller, the nastier, the pricklier that weed is, the more out of balance that soil is. So if you're growing 8-foot musk thistles and you put a little available calcium and phosphorus and open up the soil and get it breathing, and now you got 3-foot Canada thistles, you just gained a lot because every plant wants to grow as tall as it can so it can shed its seeds further in reproduction. Weeds do not like available calcium. They do not like available phosphorus. They do not like carbon and oxygen. And they really do not appreciate aerobic beneficial soil microbes. If you're using manure or composted manure, sorry, nothing personal. What's another name for manure? Poop. Crap. The Aussies call it poo. Some guys just get blatant and call it shit. There's 5 things that manure is not high in. Anybody got a guess what 5 things? Yeah. Wow. I don't know about you guys, but I'm breaking a sweat up here because this is incredibly difficult science. Most manure does not have high calcium because the animal wanted to digest it all out because it needed it, and almost every ration a good livestock producer will supplement calcium. Most good manure doesn't have much phosphorus in it because phosphorus is an expensive mineral in the soil, and you got to have 5 parts of oxygen to get some phosphorus to the plant, and most plants are short in phosphorus. Now, to give you some take-home numbers, what's a good number in calcium and phosphorus for a healthy plant if you're going to send it in, whether you got a blueberry plant or rhubarb or apples or blueberries or corn or alfalfa or wheat or sorghum, doesn't matter what it is. If you have calcium at 2% in that tissue, that petiole or that sap test, that's just the beginning of good. 2% calcium, 0.3% phosphorus is just the beginning of that soil saying, hey, thanks for the leg up. We're going to show you some appreciation. 2% calcium, 0.3% phosphorus, that's the first level of fun. When you double both of those, You now get to make your own rules. That gives you healthy soil. That gives you healthy crops. And both of those are without disease or impairment. Is it going to be perfect in the Garden of Eden? No. But weeds will not be your biggest nightmare. The orange marks in this book of J. McCaman, all of these weeds enjoy low calcium, low phosphorus, low carbon, low oxygen, and low aerobic microbes. Wonder how we get away from weeds. It's this difficult. All of the orange lines that you see in here, and if you'd like to go to the next session, we've got a question and answer session for an hour after this. You can look at this book, but all the orange lines we have successfully eliminated. We have terminated them. We've zeroed them out. We've killed them. We've reduced them. We've knocked them out with those 5 things. Available calcium, available phosphorus, carbon, oxygen, aerobic microbes. It's this simple. Refractometer. If you're at 4 or 5 or 6 bricks of sugar, you're right in with your neighbors. You have no bragging rights. If your neighbors get some Phytophthora, Rhizoctonia, Pythium, bad, detrimental, pathogenic fungal diseases, there's 5 things that fungal diseases don't like. Anybody take a guess? I know it's getting tougher. I'll stick with me. We can make it together. Calcium on an available basis has a double positive charge. When soybean rust or Asian rust came into the soybeans in Iowa quite a few years ago, several agronomists called me and they said, "We hear you're having pretty good success with Asian rust. What are you doing?" So we get there and I meet 7 different guys that have more letters behind their name than I have in my name, and Rabenberg, I've got some letters. And so it's doctor, 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 doctor. And they go, "So tell us what you're doing." It's like, well, I said, you guys are good doctors. If fungus, and they're all part of the same scumbag family, it doesn't matter what their name is, but a detrimental, pathogenic, disease-causing fungal problem, they all enjoy the same environment. And I asked them, I said, what environment do these detrimental, bad fungal problems enjoy? And they kind of look around at each other, and the lead agronomist says, "Likes a warm environment." Like, okay, doc, we're getting somewhere. So what else? Next guy says, "Well, likes wet." It's like, okay, we got 2. What else? And then it gets quiet. It gets so quiet, I find out there's a fly on the back wall that has a little gas. And they said, "Okay, Mr. South Dakota, if you're so doggone smart, what do fungal diseases like?" I said, "They like warm, they like wet. They like a low sugar environment." This gets to the refractometer, usually under 6 or 7 bricks. They like a negatively charged environment. That means deficiency of calcium. Mom's got a double positive personality, and all she has to do is show up and be available, and many things get fixed just by having the presence of calcium. So, if you have 2% calcium, 0.3% phosphorus in your plant, are you immune to fungal diseases? No. Got a good start. Fungal diseases also enjoy low sugar. Normally, if you have 0.2% calcium, 0.3% phosphorus, you're usually close to 10 bricks of sugar. If they have an EC reading on your soil test, please take a look at that, because the microbes like a certain amount of electricity. And that electricity on most ECs is anywhere from a 0.3 up to a 0.9. That's the electricity that's needed to push and pull minerals to and through the soil and to and through the plant. If you get much over a 1.1, 1.2, it's kind of like when you were kids and you got your neighbor to pee on an electric fence. Too much electricity. Not enough electricity is when the electricity goes out and your computer crashes. Your agronomist may say, that soil needs salt. That soil needs sodium. Plants need salt and sodium. Salt and sodium is one of the bigger problems in a lot of tight soil. And they're right. Plant soil microbes do need salt and sodium. But the kind they're talking about isn't what your soil needs. Microbes have the ability to take metal-based and non-metal-based minerals as they're chewing them up in the soil, and they will make organic salts. And they will never make more organic salts than what they appreciate and need. If you're using manure or composted manure, those animals have been force-fed salt and sodium to get them to eat and drink more. And the salt and the sodium levels are quite high. If you haven't attended a Neil Kinsey seminar, please pay attention when he's talking because he gives awful good numbers and ratios. Neil's done an awful lot for the industry. He has good wisdom and good leadership. This salt and sodium, if it's inorganic like a sodium chloride, will actually kill microbes. Too much electricity. It will grow weeds. If you've got kochia or foxtail ticklegrass growing, you got excess salt or sodium. When we look at fields where they have chemical resistant weeds or super weeds, they've really got super screwed up soil. And there's 5 things that soil is deficient on. You guys know what that is. Plant feeding insects. Well, I should back up for just a second. On weeds, as you get calcium and phosphorus available in the soil and the microbes increase the carbon and oxygen in your soil and you get more beneficial aerobic soil microbes, you will create an environment that grows good. And as that grows good, that calcium and phosphorus that has to be in the soil allows that plant to make more sugar, more photosynthesis. And many times in the early stages of a plant's life, up to half of the sugar that plant makes during the day, it will push down out through the roots. The experts call this a root exudate. And that root exudate is basically sugar water with trace minerals. And the more sugar that plant makes, the more it pushes down because the carbon, oxygen, hydrogen, sugar in the soil will always, always, always be just a little bit higher than what's above the ground. If you live on a coast or if you live in a volatile storm area and you're checking your bricks and you're sitting at 22 bricks and you're sitting at 22 bricks and all of a sudden it drops to 12, you may want to close the shutters because there's a storm coming. How does that plant know? I have no idea, but we've seen it 1,000 times. The plant will pull the sugar down out of the top portion of the plant and leaves into the roots in case that plant gets topped off with the storm so it has the energy to come back. If you squeeze the root of a plant, it will normally always be 1 to 1.5 bricks higher than the above ground plant. The roots need more calcium, more phosphorus, more carbon, more oxygen than the tops. If you want a good top, you got to have a good set of roots. The deeper those roots can go into an aerobic zone, the more nutrients it can grab, the more microbes it can feed, and now you have an ecosystem going. And the ecosystem gets very inexpensive because going back to California with Frank on our Healthy Farm Tour with the Acres Healthy Soil Summit, he's just south of Sacramento and it gets dry out there. It doesn't want to rain for a few months. Since he has deepened his aerobic zone, the full depth of this penetrometer and more, his irrigation costs have decreased by 50%. 50% reduction in irrigation costs, 100% reduction in synthetic nitrogen because he's got microbes. How did he get his irrigation down? Well, when we first started, he had an 8, 9, 10 to 1 carbon to nitrogen ratio in his soil. And when he saw his first numbers, he says, I'm not that old, but I'm not that young. I don't know if I'm going to make this happen. He had high magnesium, some cases 32, 34, 36% base saturation of magnesium. Horrible tight stuff. As the calcium opened up that soil, relaxed the magnesium, and put magnesium into a little bit of a polite headlock and squeezed that nitrogen off, that nitrogen started feeding the plant. 5 years ago, we showed him he had an 1.5 inch aerobic zone. This fall, he did another soil test. 5 years ago, he was at an 8, 9, or 10 to 1 carbon to nitrogen ratio. He did a 24-inch soil probe test. His carbon to nitrogen ratio is now 20, 21, or 22 to 1. Carbon holds 4 times its weight in water. That's how he got his irrigation costs reduced. So going back to the top 5 things, as you go to different seminars and as you talk to different people and as you look at different companies and Google them and call them, they're going to give you a lot of different answers. When I first got into this about 34 years ago, I would go to a lot of different seminars, and the one thing that I always got was confused. I'd hear this guy say this, I'd hear this guy say this, and I finally realized it's like, if I don't know something about the truth, how do I know how to identify it? So, we're all producers of food. The soil is a manufacturing plant. If we don't know what needs to be in the manufacturing plant, if we don't know what our plant is made of that we're trying to sell, how do we know what we need for inputs? Perfect carbon to nitrogen ratio in the soil is 30 to 1. 30 times more carbon than nitrogen. If you're buying compost, if you see some 30 to 1 carbon to nitrogen compost, get your checkbook out because it's going to be expensive. Now, what makes up a plant? As a plant is growing in the field, most plants are about 80% water. Water is a variable. Let's take the water and toss it out because we want to look at a dry matter basis. So we dehydrate that plant. We now have 20% of what we started with. Dry matter, solids. This is what the processors look at. The dry matter of the solids that are left, this is a money maker right here. And the 20% of the dry matter that's left, 47% of what we have left, that plant wants to be carbon. If it's healthy, 47% of that plant will be carbon, dry matter basis. 43% will be oxygen. We're at 90% already, and we haven't even talked about the stuff everybody else yaks about. Well, let's think about that. Carbon and oxygen, dry matter weight of a plant is 90%. Perfect compost, carbon to nitrogen, is a 30 to 1. If we do the math, that 30 to 1 carbon to nitrogen, 90% of the plant is carbon and oxygen. You got to have both. All of these numbers vary because good, healthy plants only want to be 3% nitrogen. So if 90% of a dry matter weight of a plant is carbon and oxygen, and only 3% of the dry matter weight of a plant is nitrogen, do the math, there's 30 to 1. Perfect compost. These numbers that I have given to you, if you haven't heard those before, don't feel bad, it's fairly new science. I got them out of a book that was written and published in 1859. Hasn't been around much. This is the information that a lot of big companies don't want us to know. This is the information that a lot of companies will make money if we don't know. If you have a smartphone, please Google components of a healthy plant. These numbers will pop up. If you have a phone or a computer, if you know a friend that has one, if you don't have it, say, hey, Google components of healthy soil. Boom. Please do your own research, because there's a lot of companies out there that are counting on you not doing your homework. They will sell you stuff that reacts to symptoms. When I say correct the cause, not reacting to symptoms. If I were to say that cholesterol in humans, if I were to say that's a calcium deficiency, would you believe me? Crestor and Lipitor are the number 1 and number 2 pharmaceuticals for cholesterol problems. They both have a chemical twist of calcium in them. Shin splints, heel spurs, osteoporosis, tooth decay, most forms of arthritis are all calcium deficiencies. Correct the cause. Whether you're looking at microbes, soil, plants, animals, humans, you have the top 5 things of importance that by fixing that, you can correct the cause, and many symptoms that you're used to dealing with will be nothing but a memory.